I'm going to be doing a little short showing of the PCall method in Roblox. PCall is also known as a protective method if you're familiar with C Sharp. I'm not sure if it's also in C++ or C. You could think of it similar to a try-catch statement. So let's go ahead and create a script so that I can show you. There are some things that I see users do when they use a PCall, and that is they create the bool variable, and then they create the error message variable. And then they set up their PCall similar to this. Don't mind my use of semicolons or how I program in this. I personally use C Sharp, so those habits transferred over. But anyways, let's say that you wanted to do print a plus 5. Obviously, this is going to return an error. If we go and test this in our output, as you can see right here. Oh, I didn't set up anything. The output, oops. But either way, you can see that it didn't print anything. And if we were to go and actually print this, it would say attempt to perform arithmetic add on a string and number. So basically this error is saying you're attempting to use arithmetic or math operations on a string. But that's the basic rundown of PCall. What I want to get into is where people do something like, say, with data stores. So let's create the data store service. Use game get service, data store service. Let's create a test data store, which is data store, get data store. Let's call this test data store. Now, something I commonly see people do is use this code right here, but they do something, say for example, test data store set angst. I believe that's how it's pronounced anyways. Let's say let's call our key test data. Let's give it a value of 5. Now, when you're beginning with programming, I can see this being played. It's fairly simple. The setup, it's readable. But my thing here I want to point out is that you don't require this function bit right here to begin with. Because what you're actually doing here is making 2 function calls, which can be a bit expensive, depending if you're a performance freak like I am. So what you could actually do is remove this, and you can do test data store dot set angst test data store test data, and then the data you want to save. Now, as you can see, this effectively does what the previous code did, but only here it's making 1 function call. Now, you might be wondering, how is this possible? How am I able to do this? Well, this is actually something with Roblox's object-oriented programming, because the syntax for this will actually look like this. Oops, let's do set angst test data store test data 5. Because when you use a period instead of a colon, what it actually does is with the colon, it calls self, and self basically returns the thing you're calling the method on. So effectively, when you do this, it's the same as doing test data store set anx test data 5. It's the exact same thing, except one already calls self, while the other you have to do it manually. And that's why this is possible right here. Now, another thing that I want to note is that when returning data, so let's keep our data store information here. Let's get rid of this. Let's say that you want to return some data. Success and data is PCall function. Using this example again, you'll typically people will do get anx test data like this, but again, that's not really necessary. You can do just like the other way. Just call it like this. Oh, let's not forget our parameter test data, and you can get the data that way as well. It'll return it. Now, another thing that would be very useful to note is that PCalls can return more than just one value from a method or function, however you want to call it, subroutine. So let's say success, value 1, value 2, value 3 is PCall function. Oops. Let's say we want to return A, B, 2. So now, if we go and use our output method print and output value 1, value 2, value 3, in the output we should see something like true A, B, 2. Now, something I see people get confused on is they just have one variable, and they think that that one variable will contain all these values right here. But if you were to actually do that, it would only return the 1. Let's set up a new script entirely, like this, data store service, get that. Let's create a real-time thing where we would actually use PCall, which would be where we want to save a player's data and get it. So let's say we want to save their cache data store. Is data store service get data no, not ordered. We don't want ordered right now. So cache data store. Oops. So let's do a whole function on player added. So now we have this method set up, players.player added. Yes, I know I can be using get service for players, but it's not necessary. So anyways, let's create our leader stat so that it can show up on the leaderboard. Our cache, let's create it as a folder. Leaderstats.name is leaderstats, all lowercase. Now let's create our cache value, which will be named, which will be an int value, or integer value for short. So cache value.name is cache. Then we want to have cache value.name is, oh, not name, I meant parent. Sorry about that. We want to set its parent to the leader stat because we want that to show. Then leader stat dot parent is to the new player that joins. All right, so we have our basic script set up. Now you might be wondering, how do we implement our save data and get data so that the player can get their cash? Well, what you can do is, at the top of the script here, you can do local got data returned is PCall cache data store dot get angth cache data store, and let's actually set up a player key. Player key is string format. Gonna have it accept a number. Cache data. Let's have it be their user ID. Perfect. And let's have that be there. Now, for the cache value right here, to actually implement this, what you want to do is right after here, we want to have an if statement or a conditional statement. We want to check if it managed to get the data, if the data store didn't crash, and the data return is not equal to nil. Because if you just use not, I mean, you could use not in this case since it would be returning a number, but say that you were using a bool value. Let's say for whether certain things can be toggled or not. If you use not, then it'll take the false values, regardless if it's for toggleable purposes or not. So it's better to do it like this than having to worry about that. So what we do then here is cache value dot value is equal to data return. Because remember, when we call PCall, it also returns the values from the method or function. Now let's say that you want some default cache here. Let's give them 50 cash if they don't have any previous data. Yay, free money. That's great. Now, let's say that we want to actually save the data on player, removing player. What we want to do here is do the same thing with creating a player key, get a number, and then cache data. I like using format. It's so much easier instead of concatenation. Yippee. So now we want to do, let's see, because the data store can fail, so we want to do success equals false, and we want to do while not success is PCall data store or cache data store dot set angst cache data store player key, and then say player dot leader stats dot cache dot value. Now there's a better way to do that, but just for the sake of simplicity in this showcase, I'm just doing it that way. So now we want to set up our player removing event. In this case, player removing. And this is all the code with PCall in action. Just to kind of go over it again. This PCall right here will return the data here, or return a value, more specifically, if the data store didn't crash like it does sometimes, which will be reflected in this bool right here, got data, which is why we have this check right here. And if it didn't crash, or if it didn't error, then it'll return the data as a variable here. And then we check if it actually got the data and it's not a new user, then we'll give the old player their old data. Now for here, where we want to save their actual data, we go and set up a PCall to set the data, player key, and then their cache. Now the thing with why you need PCalls with data store is that data stores, they send requests to Roblox.com for their database to get the data in the first place. So let's say that it takes too long to get the data and it times out, or an error occurs, or the data stores are down, they crashed. Well, this is why we have a PCall in place, just in case that happens, and to take the proper steps in case that does happen. Alright, I believe that's all that's needed. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below, and I hope this helped. Alright, have a good day.